Emily had always found solace in the small cottage she inhabited just outside of her quaint town. A mix of rustic charm and isolation beckoned her, offering a space where she felt connected to both nature and her own thoughts. A scent of pine filled the air, and the soft rustle of leaves whispered secrets only she could hear. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily would light candles and delve into the stories that had captivated her since childhood. Fascinated by urban legends, those haunting tales that danced between reality and imagination. A few weeks since she moved in, the nighttime hours often tempted her to explore this passion further. She would spend hours savoring old books filled with ghostly encounters, strange sights, and the mysteries that lingered in the shadow. Despite her quiet nature, Emily was endlessly curious, and the allure of the unknown justified many a late-night reading session. Evening, while sorting through boxes in her attic, she stumbled upon an old leather-bound book, its cover dusty and worn. Her heart raced as she opened it, revealing a collection of urban legends that sent chills down her spine. The text drew her in like a siren song. There, in the pages, she found tales of haunted places, apparitions, and something that caught her attention like never before: stories of the black-eyed children. Believe the chilling descriptions. Children with completely black eyes appearing at people's doors, their presence blanketing the atmosphere with an inexplicable dread. The stories were riddled with warnings, tales of those who had invited them in only to face unending despair. Emily shivered at the thought, yet something about the legend stirred her intrigue. With a flickering candle beside her, casting dancing shadows on the walls, Emily resolved to share her find. Following day, she invited her friend Mark over, knowing full well his skeptical nature would ignite an interesting discussion. Mark had always been grounded, often teasing her fascination with the supernatural, but deep down, he held a protective instinct for Emily, especially in matters that felt too dark to brush aside. Arrived, he settled into the cozy living room, his demeanor light and casual. Emily wasted no time, excitedly unveiling the book and flipping through the pages until she reached the section on the black-eyed children. Their eerie appearances, describing how unsuspecting homeowners would find themselves entranced by the children's eyes, even feeling a pull to let them inside. Mark listened, his brows furrowing slightly, amusement dancing in his eyes. He dismissed her enthusiasm as mere myths, telling Emily that she should know better than to fall prey to such tales. However, beneath the surface of his jest, Emily detected a sliver of unease. "Just think about it, Em," he said playfully, shaking his head. "We're going to let a children's ghost story get to you. Those stories are just modern folklore, made to entertain, not frighten." As their playful banter continued, Emily couldn't shake the lingering chill she felt from the stories. In the back of her mind, doubts began to creep into her thoughts. Actually believed these tales could materialize in her own life. After all, her cottage stood merely a stone's throw away from dark woods, with shadows stretching into the night. The night deepened. Emily and Mark shared laughter and stories, but the book lay open between them, a peculiar weight hovering over their conversation. Emily gazed into the flickering candlelight, the shadows creating a tapestry on the walls, and wondered what else might lurk beyond their cozy refuge. With a final glance at the book, she decided perhaps it was time to put such chilling tales aside at least for a night. Little did she know, the unexplored boundaries of her curiosity danced ever closer to her door, where stories sometimes wove themselves into reality, often leading dauntless souls deeper into the night. The evening wore on. The sky outside Emily's quaint cottage turned a deep shade of navy, shadows stretching across the landscape like fingers reaching out. A winding path leading to her door felt increasingly isolating, every rustle in the bushes making her heart race just a little faster. Her living room, a flickering candle beside her illuminating the pages of the old book she had found. Her mind wandered through stories of eerie encounters as she sipped her tea, comforting warmth clashing with the unsettling tales that danced in her thoughts. Then, a noise broke through the stillness of the night, a faint tapping, rhythmic and persistent, coming from her window. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The comforting atmosphere of her home began to feel suffocating, a shroud of anxiety wrapping tightly around her. Each tap resonated through her, vibrating with an almost sentient dread. With trepidation, she rose from her seat, the floor creaking beneath her as she moved towards the window. Peering through the veil of darkness, her heart pounded louder. Standing outside, illuminated by the dim streetlight, were two children, Leela and Ethan. Emily's brow furrowed, body tense as she took in their appearance. Leela, with her pale skin and dark, long hair, looked small and vulnerable in her tattered dress. Ethan stood slightly behind her, his hoodie casting a shadow over his face, but a faint smile played at his lips, a strange contrast to the cold fear settling in Emily's gut. Children stood there, still as statues, the air around them thick with an uneasy tension. Emily felt an inexplicable pull toward them, their presence oddly compelling despite the instinctual alarm bells ringing in her mind. You could see Leela's wide, black-eyed stare, seemingly innocent but with an intensity that seeped into her very core. Ethan's haunting smile danced dangerously on the edge of something dark and foreboding. "Let us in," they implored without words, their bodies urging her silently. A world outside felt increasingly alien, as if they were the only figures that truly belonged to the night. Emily felt the weight of their gaze, a sensation both inviting and dreadful. Held her to approach the window, she could not understand. Each breath, she fought against the rising tide of fear. It claimed to be lost, a familiar plea that tugged deeply at her compassionate nature. But every urban legend she knew whispered of dangers hidden behind trusting these children. They were just two children, standing in the dark, hesitated, battling the clash of empathy and fear within her heart. Ark's earlier teasing echoed in her ears, how he joked about her obsession with urban legends. A dread wrapped around her, reminding her of chilling tales of those who had opened their doors, only to regret their decision forever. Emily glanced back towards the candle flickering warmly inside her home, the glow a stark contrast to the coldness of night outside. Push and pull warred within her a desire to protect, to welcome, and a primal instinct to retreat. A tapping at the window grew more insistent, the shadows lengthening as if to envelop her. To let them in, with every moment of indecision, she felt herself drawn closer to the window, their presence intoxicating yet suffocating. Leela's solemn stare and Ethan's haunting smile dug deeper into her resolve, threatening to erode it entirely. Their soft, almost childlike pleading tore at her heartstrings, yet in the back of her mind echoed stories filled with sorrow and regret. Emily stood there, lost between compassion and fear, the air thickened with a sense of disquiet. Children reached out, their hands brushing against the glass as if trying to dissolve the barrier between them. The darkness outside pulsed with a life of its own, and the shadows swirled unsettlingly, reminding her of the ancient folklore that warned against such encounters. Time seemed to stretch infinitely, the weight of her decision pressing relentlessly upon her. He inhaled deeply, her throat dry as she tore her gaze from their dark eyes and made a choice. A surge of defiance ignited within her self-preservation, overcame the empathetic urge that threatened to swallow her whole. Emily stepped back from the window, and the change in the atmosphere was palpable, like a cold breeze passing through the room. Children fell silent, their expressions shifting from pleading to something darker, an unsettling shift in their demeanor. Ethan's smile faded, replaced by an unsettling stoicism, while Leela's eyes deepened, absorbing the faint light around them. That moment of clarity, she understood the danger had been real, tangible, lurking just outside her door. Their silent plea morphed into a chilling stillness that paralyzed the air. Emily had chosen her path, the threshold not crossed, and as she stepped further back into her home, the children slowly turned away. A vapor of wind, they faded into the night, leaving no trace of their presence, just the lingering essence of dread that packed itself into every corner of Emily's mind. Silence settled once more, an unshakable truth surfaced in her thoughts. Legends weren't mere stories to entertain, they were warnings, and she would heed them from now on. The days turned into chilly nights, Emily found herself increasingly captivated by the strange sensations that accompanied the onset of dusk. Sense of anticipation tinged the air, wrapping around her like a soft veil. A small cottage, warm and inviting, stood in stark contrast to the dark woods that whispered threats just beyond her window. Yet Emily felt a strange longing to uncover what lay behind those whispered secrets. As the moon hung precariously in the sky, draping a silvery glow over her surroundings, Emily settled into her favorite chair, the old book resting on her lap. The pages felt familiar, yet this time her heart raced with a blend of excitement and dread. Through the legends once more, feeling an unnatural pull to the stories that had once seemed so distant, as though the shadows were conspiring to draw her deeper into their embrace. She turned a page. Faint sound breached her thoughts, a soft tapping, almost akin to coaxing fingers against glass. A noise startled her, resonating within the quiet that enveloped her. Hesitantly, she looked toward her window, heart thrumming in her chest. It persisted, gentle yet insistent, echoing a lingering unease that had begun to take root in her mind. Curiosity and a nagging sense of foreboding entwined within her as she approached the window, heart pounding with each step. Hearing outside, she couldn't believe her eyes. Standing there were two children, their frames backlit by the pale moonlight. A girl with long, dark hair and a tattered dress swayed slightly, while beside her stood a boy in a simple hoodie, his haunting smile sending shivers through Emily's spine. Possibly still, yet there was an air of desperate energy about them. With a breath caught in her throat, Emily felt a strange magnetism pulling her closer. She recognized them from the pages, the embodiment of the tales she had come to read with almost morbid fascination. He wished to tear her gaze away, to retreat from the impending dread that settled in the pit of her stomach. Yet, despite every instinct urging her to step back, she found herself entranced. The children's voices, when they spoke, were soft and ethereal, almost as if they were being carried by the wind. Be lost, a note of pleading in their tone that threaded through the cold night air. Emily's heart ached at the sound, pulling at her empathy. How could she turn away two children in need? As minutes slipped by countless seconds mingling with tides of uncertainty, Mark arrived, breaking the spell of the night. His jovial demeanor quickly shifted, palpable dread rising like a wave around him as he took in the sight before him. Emily noticed the tension in his jaw, his brow furrowing deeper with each moment. Mark's eyes darted from the children to Emily, concern clouding his features as he urged her softly not to open the door. Unsettling stories of the black-eyed children echoed in his words, tales of regret and sorrow that flooded back into Emily's mind like specters from the past. Gravity of his caution, but conflicted feelings warred within her. The children's fear mirrored in their dark. Empty eyes fed her compassion even as dread gnawed at her resolve. The longer they stood there, the more the children's quiet desperation seeped into Emily's heart. Yes, they wouldn't hurt her, claiming they only needed shelter from the darkness outside. Each word fueled her internal struggle. Was her kindness compelling her toward danger, or was it the invocation of some ancient curse? Whisper buried deep within the shadows, time seemed fluid, ending around the magnetic pull of the moment. Thickened, charged with unspoken words and swirling fears. Finally, Emily felt herself swaying, her heart entrapped by the conflicting desires of both fear and sympathy. To reach for the doorknob, to let them in and prove that even the darkest places could hold warmth. As she glanced back at Mark, she noticed the apprehension etched into his face, his protective instinct stark against the backdrop of the cottage fading light. The children remained silent, their eyes urging her like twin voids demanding her surrender. A moment of clarity amidst the chaos. The legends came rushing back to her, the tales of despair, the whispers of loss. Stepping back from the door, Emily felt the weight of her decision settle like lead in her chest. Succumb to the gathering darkness. Herself with resolve, she took one forlorn glance at the children, no longer just a figment of urban legends, but a living embodiment of the unknown that lurked beyond the threshold. In that propelled breath, Emily recalled the stories and the warnings. herself to remember the consequences of compassion misplaced, and as she turned away, she felt the air shift. The children's demeanor changed as if a switch had been flipped. Their expressions hardened into something darker as silence enveloped the night, a bond unfurling between them that spoke of centuries of ancient fear. Without a word, they faded like mist upon a chilly dawn, leaving behind an unsettling stillness that echoed around her. Emily's heart raced, the shadows creeping closer, pulling back the veil of familiarity she had cherished. Ark stood beside her, a silent acknowledgement of the horrors they had just avoided weighing heavily between them. Though dissipating rapidly into the night, the encounter with the children left an indelible mark on Emily's soul. Trembling realization swept over her. He had come face to face with the very shadows she had long wished to explore. Yet, in doing so, she uncovered not just their mystery, but the darkness that could haunt the soul of the curious. At night, as she settled into bed, sleep eluded her. Shadows danced along the walls, whispering old legends she had once cherished, but would now approach with a newfound reverence. Emily vowed quietly to learn more, but with a tinged respect for the darkness, understanding that sometimes the stories that lurk beyond the door are best left undisturbed. Emily had always felt an undeniable connection to the night, a time when the world slipped into a hush and her thoughts could roam freely. At that evening, as she stood retreating from the children at her window, her heart raced with the realization that the darkness held more than the solace she cherished. It wrapped itself around her like a cloak, heavy with the implications of her decision. A fleeting silhouette of Leela and Ethan lingered in her mind. Their pale skin appeared ghostly in the soft glow of her candlelight. How easily compassion could have blinded her to the chilling legend she'd read so avidly. Now, the atmosphere felt deserted, as if the very air held its breath, reflecting on the decision that had spared her from becoming another cautionary tale. Emily felt the weight of that moment pressing on her chest, a reminder that some stories had to remain in the realm of myth. Ark, having retreated slightly during the encounter, finally broke the silence. His voice trembled just a hint as he spoke, faced with urgency, his concern for Emily palpable. He reminded her of the countless stories he had heard, tales of those who offered hospitality to the black-eyed children and were never the same again. Those stories weren't just ghost tales. They possessed a truth rooted in fear and regret. Reality settled around her. Emily looked around her cottage, the familiar warmth she had cultivated suddenly feeling foreign. He reached for the old book once more, turning the pages with newfound caution. The words that had once sparked curiosity now dripped with a sinister undertone, grounding her in the reality of what lurked outside her threshold. Emily wanted to share more of the stories with Mark, her voice a whisper as she recounted the accounts of eerie occurrences reported by those who had let in children just like Leela and Ethan. He spoke of strange happenings that ensued, deepening shadows that crept into everyday life, and those who heard unseen whispers echoing through their homes long after those children had departed. Ark listened intently, no longer the teasing friend but a companion wrapped in uncertainty. He leaned closer, sharing in her incredulity and fear. A mere idea of encountering beings from the dark left them shaken. The embers of their laughter from the night before seemed to fade, replaced by tension that left them both unsettled and wide-eyed in the aftermath. They sat in silence. The wind howled softly against the windows, causing the candlelight to flicker. There was an undeniable energy in the air, as if the house itself began to absorb their unease. Profound realization settled over Emily, a sense of respect for the unknown that had begun to shape her understanding of the world around her. She vowed to learn more about those legends, not out of reckless curiosity this time, but driven by a desire to protect herself and anyone who might find themselves drawn into similar tales of dread. Yet, part of her still ached with a tinge of regret and understanding that some mysteries may remain unsolved for good reason, their darkness lurking just beyond the perimeter of her candlelit sanctuary. Every day that followed, Emily approached the shadows outside her door with reverence. Stood now that not all stories are merely for entertainment. Some carry weight and lessons learned through experience. Black-eyed children may have vanished into the night, but but the imprint they left on her heart would forever remind her of the thin veil separating the known from the unknown. He settled down that night, the cottage now her vigilant fortress against an encroaching darkness. Warmth of her blankets, she kept the old book close, feeling a mix of resolve and respect for the enigmatic legends that whispered in the night, a reminder that some encounters are best left unexplored. The days passed since that fateful encounter. Emily's life took on a different hue, colors dimmed by the weight of her experience. The sun would rise, casting golden light into her cottage, and all she felt was the lingering chill of the dark figures that had stood outside her door. Shadows that once whispered secrets in the trees now felt more like threats, creeping into her thoughts as she attempted to resume her life. Evenings became the hardest part of the day, the dusk wrapping around her like a familiar shroud. Each twilight, as the air turned crisp and the world seemed to darken, Emily felt a tightness in her chest, an anticipation laced with fear for what might come next. She would sit by her window, her heart racing as she glanced at the rambling woods that bordered her property, the line blurred between reality and the tales she had cherished. A week after the encounter, she gathered her courage and pulled out the old book again. The pages felt heavy with meaning, each word laden with the weight of the stories she had once enjoyed so deeply. She read about the black-eyed children. She couldn't help but notice how her feelings towards them had shifted. It's been mere curiosity, transformed into a profound respect for the danger lurking in the tales. Ark visited often, sensing her unease. Despite his earlier skepticism, there was a seriousness to his demeanor now. He would chat with her about everything but the encounter, opting for discussions that included the mundane movies, books, plans for the future. But Emily felt the unsaid words hovering between them, a truth that lingered in the air, palpable as the evening mist. Vanity in her solitude coaxed her to break the silence. Flames flickered in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows upon the walls. She turned to Mark, her voice barely above a whisper. He expressed her longing to know more, curiosity wrestling with caution in her heart. Ark pursed his lips, his brow furrowed with concern. He told her that knowledge of the unknown was not always a gift. Sometimes it was a weight they had to bear. Yet, Emily felt the need for understanding burgeoning within her. He believed the legends held a deeper truth, one that could illuminate the nature of what she had encountered. And so, weeks passed, the quest for knowledge leading her deeper into the realm of urban legends. He sought out old texts, subtle hints buried in online forums, stories shared by those with memories long forgotten. Each revelation brought her closer to comprehending the darkness. With every page turned, Emily learned of others who had faced the children, tales laced with sorrow and regret. Their stories mirrored her own encounter, a fine line between empathy and danger, an unyielding temptation calling to the curious heart. Each account revealed how allowing the shadows inside led to dire consequences, lives dismantled by a simple act of kindness, twisted into something far more sinister. Her knowledge expanded, so too did her sense of dread. The nights grew longer, and the walls of her cottage seemed to encroach upon her, tightening with every whispered legend. There were moments when, in the dead of night, she thought she heard faint tapping at her windows, but each time she would summon the courage, step closer, and discover only the placid darkness outside. Then came a night when the air shifted. The atmosphere itself had conspired against her, its weight both heavy and electric. Emily sat in the living room, her heart pounding when a soft knock almost drowned beneath the relentless wind. Her breath quickened, caught between fear and an insatiable longing to know what lay outside her door. Ark happened to be there that evening, nervously pacing the floor. He turned towards her, his eyes wide with worry, urging her against opening the door. Yet, with all she had learned, she couldn't let fear dictate her actions any longer. A moment felt inevitable, as though pieces were falling into place. Perhaps the darkness she had wished to understand was finally at her doorstep. With trembling hands, Emily approached the door, the tales resonating in her mind like distant echoes. She steeled herself, grasping the doorknob, her fingers trembling against the cold metal. Finally opened the door, The world outside lay shrouded in a fog, obscuring everything beyond the porch. First, she saw nothing but swirling mist. The air felt charged, and as her heart raced in anticipation, a pair of familiar figures stepped forward, emerging from the shadows. There stood Leela and Ethan, just as before hauntingly beautiful, but now, the aura surrounding them felt more significant than any ghostly tale. Their expressions were solemn, eyes gleaming black in the dim light, as if they too had come to understand the weight of what they represented. Emily felt something within her tremble, an awareness that she had stood at the crossroads before, both temptation and dread conjoined. That moment, as she gazed at the children, she no longer saw lost souls seeking shelter, but rather remnants of the legends that undeniably lived and breathed. Her heart edged toward compassion, but the recollection of caution held her grounded. Something shifted in the atmosphere, an unspeakable dynamic between the children and her, their eyes imploring yet fierce. Temptation to invite them insurged again, a pulse of darkness that demanded she rethink her decision. The legends flooded back, a warning on the cusp of her lips. Determination, she stepped back, asserting her will. The air thickened, and with her rejection, Leela and Ethan were momentarily taken aback, their expressions shifting yet again. They exchanged glances and then turned, fading into the night, leaving her trembling but resolute. The choice had been hers to turn away from the depths of darkness that could easily swallow her whole. The door closed, marking the finality of her decision. The fresh resolve coursed through her veins. Stood the call of the unknown, refusing to let her fascination with urban legends dictate her life. Now that some mysteries were meant to remain unanswered, safely tucked away in the shadows beyond her threshold. Silence enveloped the cottage once more, yet inside her heart burned a spark of defiance. Emily understood that her journey into the depths of darkness had merely illuminated the true nature of curiosity, the realization that fear could also guide the way. The stories would remain, perhaps, but now they were wrapped in a protective sheath born from experience, holding respect for the unknown rather than a misguided longing to explore it further. With the dawn breaking outside, Emily took a deep breath, finding solace in the quiet sanctity of her cottage. She pulled the curtains closed, shutting out the remnants of night and their lingering chill, resolving to tread carefully in a world where shadows still whispered secrets worth keeping. The days turned into chilly nights. Emily found herself increasingly captivated by the strange sensations that accompanied the onset of dusk. A sense of anticipation tinged the air, wrapping around her like a soft veil. A small cottage, warm and inviting, stood in stark contrast to the dark woods that whispered threats just beyond her window. Yet Emily felt a strange longing to uncover what lay behind those whispered secrets. As the moon hung precariously in the sky, draping a silvery glow over her surroundings, Emily settled into her favorite chair, the old book resting on her lap. The pages felt familiar, yet this time her heart raced with a blend of excitement and dread. Through the legends once more, feeling an unnatural pull to the stories that had once seemed so distant, as though the shadows were conspiring to draw her deeper into their embrace. She turned a page. A faint sound breached her thoughts, a soft tapping, almost akin to coaxing fingers against glass. A noise startled her, resonating within the quiet that enveloped her. Hesitantly, she looked toward her window, heart thrumming in her chest. It persisted, gentle yet insistent, echoing a lingering unease that had begun to take root in her mind. Curiosity and a nagging sense of foreboding entwined within her as she approached the window, heart pounding with each step. Peering outside, she couldn't believe her eyes. Standing there were two children, their frames backlit by the pale moonlight. A girl with long, dark hair and a tattered dress swayed slightly, while beside her stood a boy in a simple hoodie, his haunting smile sending shivers through Emily's spine. Possibly still, yet there was an air of desperate energy about them. With a breath caught in her throat, Emily felt a strange magnetism pulling her closer. He recognized them from the pages, the embodiment of the tales she had come to read with almost morbid fascination. He wished to tear her gaze away, to retreat from the impending dread that settled in the pit of her stomach. Despite every instinct urging her to step back, she found herself entranced. The children's voices, when they spoke, were soft and ethereal, almost as if they were being carried by the wind. Be lost, a note of pleading in their tone that threaded through the cold night air. Emily's heart ached at the sound, pulling at her empathy. How could she turn away two children in need? As minutes slipped by countless seconds mingling with tides of uncertainty, Mark arrived, breaking the spell of the night. His jovial demeanor quickly shifted, palpable dread rising like a wave around him as he took in the sight before him. Emily noticed the tension in his jaw, his brow furrowing deeper with each moment. Mark's eyes darted from the children to Emily, concern clouding his features as he urged her softly not to open the door. Unsettling stories of the black-eyed children echoed in his words, tales of regret and sorrow that flooded back into Emily's mind like specters from the past. Gravity of his caution, but conflicted feelings warred within her. The children's fear mirrored in their dark. Empty eyes fed her compassion even as dread gnawed at her resolve. The longer they stood there, the more the children's quiet desperation seeped into Emily's heart. Yes, they wouldn't hurt her, claiming they only needed shelter from the darkness outside. Each word fueled her internal struggle. Was her kindness compelling her toward danger, or was it the invocation of some ancient curse? Whisper buried deep within the shadows, time seemed fluid, ending around the magnetic pull of the moment. Thickened, charged with unspoken words and swirling fears. Profound realization settled over Emily, a sense of respect for the unknown that had begun to shape her understanding of the world around her. In that propelled breath, Emily recalled the stories and the warnings, told herself to remember the consequences of compassion misplaced, and as she turned away, she felt the air shift. The children's demeanor changed as if a switch had been flipped. Their expressions hardened into something darker as silence enveloped the night, a bond unfurling between them that spoke of centuries of ancient fear. Without a word, they faded like mist upon a chilly dawn, leaving behind an unsettling stillness that echoed around her. Emily's heart raced, the shadows creeping closer, pulling back the veil of familiarity she had cherished. Mark stood beside her, a silent acknowledgement of the horrors they had just avoided weighing heavily between them. Though dissipating rapidly into the night, the encounter with the children left an indelible mark on Emily's soul. Trembling realization swept over her. He had come face to face with the very shadows she had long wished to explore. Yet, in doing so, she uncovered not just their mystery, but the darkness that could haunt the soul of the curious. At night, as she settled into bed, sleep eluded her. Shadows danced along the walls, whispering old legends she had once cherished, but would now approach with a newfound reverence. Emily vowed quietly to learn more, but with a tinged respect for the darkness, understanding that sometimes the stories that lurk beyond the door are best left undisturbed. Twilight cast its soft shadows over the small cottage. Emily felt the weight of the past week settle heavily upon her shoulders. Though the days had lifted her spirits, the nights brought back the unease of her encounter with Leela and Ethan, the black-eyed children. The warmth of the sun outside seemed a distant memory as nightfall approached, creeping through the edges of her world like the specter of temptation. Living room. The flicker of candlelight danced upon the walls, illuminating the familiar surroundings but unable to erase the lingering fear that nestled in the corners of her heart. Memories of Leela and Ethan haunted her thoughts, their dark eyes still vivid in her mind's eye. Each soft rustle outside became a reminder of the unknown the children, with their desperate pleas echoing through her subconscious. Despite the comfort of her beloved reading chair, Emily felt restless. The old book sat beside her, its pages filled with legends and warnings. Couldn't shake the feeling that knowledge was not the refuge she had once believed it to be. The stories had taken root in her mind, intertwining with her reality, blurring the lines she had once taken for granted. Just as she positioned herself to immerse in the comfort of the tales that used to enchant her, the wind howled outside, chilling the air that lingered in her cottage. That gust held secrets, hints of what lurked beyond her door, what might lurk in the murmurs of the trees that surrounded her home. And then she heard it, the soft tapping. like the ghostly echo of a heartbeat against her window. It sent a jolt of panic through her veins. Emily's breath quickened. The air thickened with an energy she could not identify. Moment. She didn't have to turn to know what lay outside. Dread swept over her. She heard the stirring of footsteps behind her. Ark had come over, as he often did in moments like these, a comforting presence amid her swirling uncertainty. His footsteps approached, growing heavier as the tension mounted. "Emily," Mark said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You hear that?" She nodded, unable to tear her gaze from the window. The shadows seemed to pulse in rhythm with the tapping, an unsettling chorus that beckoned to her. Emily's heart raced as she felt the pull within, a duality that pitted her urge to protect herself against the overwhelming need to understand. "There's something out there," he whispered, both fear and concern coloring his words. "You can't let them in." His voice held urgency, as if each heartbeat echoed the memories of the stories she had shared with him. A warning was clear, but somewhere deep within, her curiosity nagged. Fighting against the tide of impulse, she envisioned the look in Leela's eyes, the vulnerability framed by darkness, a split second of innocence that seemed intertwined with something deeply sinister. He sensed that the children had shifted from lost souls, seeking refuge, to figures of haunting legend. A truth wrapped around her thoughts, suffocating her compassion with dread. Ark stepped closer, his protective demeanor surfacing as he reached for her hand. "Emily, we need to go somewhere else, anywhere but here. Can't risk it." A strength in his grip gave her pause. She looked into his eyes, searching for the reassurance she knew he wanted to provide. But still, the tapping persisted, rhythmically coaxing her toward a decision. Memories of light faded as darkness whispered tales of lost trust, of doors breached at the behest of shadow. Every tapping sound reverberated within her, each one asking for acceptance, pleading for her to break the barrier she held. Gathering herself, Emily took a deep breath, summoning the will to confront the encroaching nightmare. What if, started, trembling at the thought, what if they really are just lost? "Emily," Mark's voice echoed with intensity, grounding her once more. "Think of what you read. Those stories were written for a reason. You can't let that doubt cloud your judgment." A moment stretched between them, heavy with uncertainty and fear. The tapping turned frantic, as if sensing the rising tension within the cottage, sensing Emily's wavering resolve. Glancing back at the window, she saw their silhouettes illuminated in the moonlight. Leela stood small, delicate hands pressed against the glass, her face an ethereal mask of desperation. Ethan loomed slightly behind her, a chilling smile etched on his lips, one that twisted the very nature of innocence into something unrecognizable. For the first time, Emily felt a flicker of doubt worm its way into her heart. This was not an innocent plea. It was a dark allure, one that begged to pull her into its depths. A moment crystallized into clarity. This wasn't just about opening her door. It was about stepping into a realm she could not unsee. "Ark," she whispered, voice trembling, "they are not just children. They are something else, something darker." The surge of resolve, Emily turned her back to the window, erasing those piercing dark eyes from her sight. Voices, the warnings from old legends, surged through her mind, dangers that coaxed with an alluring softness but delivered heart-rending consequences, unletting her curiosity dictate her actions. The air thrummed with the weight of her decision as she took a determined step towards Mark, standing firm against the door that separated her from the unknown. "Oh," she declared, "this time I will not be swayed." Mark nodded, his face a mix of relief and pride, understanding her resolve as the tapping turned into an eerie silence. This outside felt almost deafening, the shadows waiting, biding their time. Time slipped away. Emily felt the weight of their presence outside diminish. He turned slowly toward the window one last time, finding it eerily quiet. Children were gone, shadows swallowed by the night, their pleas extinguished like the last flicker of her candle. That silence, Emily realized she had crossed a threshold, a line between fascination and understanding, a fine balance that held dangers she had once brushed aside. Stories, once filled with an alluring mystery, became stark reality, a glimpse into darkness she would forever heed. Dawn broke, casting a gentle light over the cottage. Emily smiled softly to herself. The shadows would still linger, but she would no longer fear them. Now armed with knowledge and respect for the unknown, she embraced the stories not just as tales woven from the fabric of night, but as profound lessons guiding her journey forward. With a heart alight with newfound courage, she resolved to shape her life with intent, allowing the shadows to dance just beyond her door, where they belonged, safely tucked away from the warmth of her home. Emily's life had become a delicate dance between the light of day and the encroaching shadows of night. The sun began to set each evening. A familiar tension filled her cottage. Each creak of the wood and rustle of leaves heightened her awareness of the dark secrets lurking just beyond her window. A haunting encounter with Leela and Ethan had left her unsettled, and each dusk now brought with it a shadow of anticipation, a tingle of fear that prickled at the back of her mind. At evening, the atmosphere felt heavier, the impending night carrying a chill that seeped into the very walls of her home. Emily sat curled in her favorite chair by the fireplace. The comforting crackle of burning was somehow at odds with her unease. The old book lay open on her lap, its pages yellowed and worn from the countless stories she had pored over, tales that had captivated her and, now, made her shiver with trepidation. She began to read about the black-eyed children again, searching for understanding and clarity in the words. The stories danced before her eyes, each one more chilling than the last, tales of lost souls who had drawn in unsuspecting, kind-hearted individuals, leaving behind a wake of sorrow and despair. Yet, as much as she yearned to turn away, a strange compulsion pulled her deeper into the lore, igniting her curiosity even as it twisted into fear. Mark had been a comforting presence since the encounter, frequently checking in on Emily, yet he too had grown wary of the tales that skirted the edge of their reality. On this night, he arrived with a familiar casualness, but the moment he stepped inside, Emily noted the weight of unspoken words lingering between them. His chuckle, usually light and easy, felt strained, as if he were carefully considering each syllable before he spoke. "How's the research going?" he asked, settling down in the armchair across from her, eyes probing yet tinged with concern. Emily looked up, meeting his gaze, a mix of excitement and apprehension swirling within her. She shared her findings, recounting the eerie tales she had come across since she resolved to delve deeper, relaying each nerve-wracking fact and warning that echoed through the ages. With each story she shared, Mark leaned forward, his brows knitting together. He spoke carefully, a hint of urgency creeping into his tone, reminding her of the dire consequences faced by those who let their curiosity guide them too far. He had read some of the accounts too, the undeniable truth lurking behind each cautionary tale. As they spoke, the room felt electric, as if the very air were charged with anticipation. Outside, the wind moaned alongside the trees, the shadows outside creeping ever closer to her sanctuary as the twilight deepened. Suddenly, a soft tapping resonated from the window, the familiar rhythm sending electric jolts down Emily's spine. The uneasy tension in the air thickened, wrapping around them like an unseen force. Emily's heart raced, torn between the dread that settled upon her and the curiosity that had always ignited her spirit. "Maybe it's just the branches," Mark muttered nervously, yet he was already on his feet, peering cautiously toward the window as if struggling against some primal instinct to turn away. Both knew, deep down, what lay beyond that glass pane. Leela and Ethan's faces flashed in Emily's mind, shadowy figures with hollow black eyes. Unspoken fear gripped Emily as she rose from her seat, stepping toward the window. Her own heart seemed to wrestle against her ribs. The promise of the unknown loomed, teasing her with the prospect of exploration. "Emily, don't," Mark urged, his voice low and trembling as he positioned himself between her and the window. "You can't let them in." Stories. He looked at her with concern, and in that moment, she felt a mixture of sympathy and resistance, a discordant hymn of desire against caution. Every warning echoed in her mind, yet the call of curiosity continued to fuel her steps. Feel the pull, a whisper that urged her to look beyond, to reach out. shaky breaths, she gathered the courage to peer outside. Her heart raced. A gray fog crept along the ground, obscuring everything in its path. Through the haze, she could distinctively make out the silhouettes of two familiar children. They stood just at the edge of the light cast by her porch, eerily still, entrancing her with an uneasy familiarity. Let us in. They seemed to beckon without uttering a word, their dark eyes wide and somehow pleading, intertwined with a sense of growing dread. A memory of their previous encounter surged through her, a flood of emotion, the twinkling of trust wrestling against the chill of fear. For a heartbeat, she felt the pull like a magnet, the inexplicable urge to step closer, to extend her hand beyond the threshold. Feared lost, innocent, suffering perhaps even. Yet, Mark's voice broke through her thoughts as he grabbed her arm gently but firmly. "We're not thinking of opening that door, are you, Emily? This is exactly what we've talked about." The fortifying words stung, binding her in reality while leaving her heart shackled by that desperate empathy. Back, reminding herself of the legends, the warnings that echoed from every page she'd read. Those who had opened their doors often learned too late the truth hidden behind those dark eyes. Drawing a deep breath, she took a step back, his eyes pleading with her not to give in to the temptation. Children's silhouettes shifted, their faces transforming to reflect something darker, a shift in the atmosphere that made it clear the moment had changed irrevocably. With every second that slipped, the air thickened around them, enveloping Emily in a tangible dread. With a silent promise to herself, this time she would not become another cautionary tale. "Goodbye," Emily whispered softly, though she didn't know if they could hear her. A moment hung in stasis, and as she turned away, the children fell silent, their eyes swirling with a shadowy void that seemed to absorb the light. Will their presence fade like the last remnants of twilight? They dissolved into the darkness beyond her door. A tapping ceased in an instant, a sudden stillness left in its wake. The very night had exhaled, and Emily found herself swaying on the edge of resolution. The danger had been real. Mark stood beside her in solidarity, the pulse of horror lifting away, replaced by a shared breath of relief. Yet behind them, a newfound silence settled over the room, weighing heavy in the air, folding them both into the quiet struggle of haunting memories that would accompany them long into the night. With the door firmly shut, Emily felt the remnants of their encounter seep into her veins, a stark reminder that curiosity had its price, and some mysteries were best left unexplored. The encounter lingered in the corners of her consciousness, simply a thread woven into the tapestry of her life, forever entwined with the darkness that crouched just outside her door.